Welcome in. I'm your co-host, powered by SoloPod. Today we're doing something different. This is the origin episode. The whole story. Fourth grade to right now. So let's start at the very beginning. What was the kid selling paper wallets actually after?
I don't know what it was about that original entrepreneurial idea of mine. I don't know where I saw it, where I came up with it, but I said, you know what? I'm going to make something and I'm going to sell something. I ended up doing it with a friend at the time, actually, as well. And it was fun. We started with paper wallets and then we graduated to duct tape wallets. And that business was called All Star Wallets and More. It's actually funny enough, my first ever email and still my email to this day. And yeah, that would have been, gosh, I was what, 8 or 9 years old.
8 years old, already thinking in brands. What did it feel like the first time somebody actually paid you for one?
Man, I wish I could remember the exact moment. I'm gonna guess that it was probably my one of my grandmas at the time that bought my first wallet from me that I had created. I know growing up, especially my mom's mom, just always my biggest supporter in everything I did, and that has not changed till this day. And apparently, I loved the feeling so much that I kept doing it for years and years. I remember I had collectively rounded up. I remember I grossed out or I netted at $1,200 between the 2 years of selling $1 to $2 paper wallets and then $5 to $10 duct tape wallets.
$1,200 at 9 years old, one wallet at a time. That work ethic was clearly in you early, but take me forward, because there's a big jump between paper wallets and launching an actual apparel brand in high school. What changed?
Growing up, my favorite thing to do, it still is. I haven't done it in a while and we'll get into that, but hunting, right? So my sophomore year of high school, I had said, you know what, I'm too businessy and entrepreneurial minded. I was already growing, mowing yards and doing landscaping projects on the weekends in high school. So I was familiar to making money. And as I got into all these hobbies, they cost money, right? Especially if you want to do it your way, right? You want to have your own version of everything that, your dad has or whoever you do these activity with. And well, they cost money. And, your parents are only going to fund you, so much, right? Until it's just eventually they tell you to save up and buy it yourself. So I decided to start He's Down Outdoors, which was my first ever, I'll call it successful business, which was a hunting apparel brand. He's Down, first two words out of every hunter's mouth. Still to this day, the best brand name and slogan I've ever seen across any niche or industry in my entire life. And then, yeah, I guess I just started to fund other hobbies and to really just make something of myself. I remember being that young and intentional enough to be like, wow, I need to do cool stuff. And, this is the first step of me doing cool stuff.
You started a brand to fund a life you wanted to build, not to get rich. What made Heads Down actually work when most high school businesses just fizzle?
So again, the name and the slogan was killer. Okay. This is, mind you, in the early days of social media, right? Instagram was hardly a thing at the time. And I remember Justin Bieber at the time only had just over 1 million followers or, whatever it was. People didn't have 1 million back in the day. You know what I mean? If you had, the K on your profile, if you had over 10K, that was incredibly massive. And I was able to grow that brand completely organically with, the old algorithms and old systems to where you could only, grow organically if you weren't a celebrity. The biggest traffic you'd get is people manually searching for you. I was able to grow that brand to as high as, I believe we peaked at 39,000 followers. And, and in 2016, 2017, that was a massive deal.
Organic growth before the algorithm gave anyone a shortcut. That is real proof of concept. So you've got Heads Down popping, you're mowing yards, you're building things at 16, 17 years old. What happened next? Because I know the story doesn't just keep climbing from there.
That would have put me at about my junior, now going into senior year of high school. And around that time, I was still playing baseball. I had then, moved and transferred. My family got a divorce. My dad and my uncle, who were my, coach, my entire middle school and high school baseball career at the private Christian school that I grew up playing at. We had an amazing baseball program still to this day. The team to beat, the best, baseball program in Florida high school baseball history. And they stepped down from coaching just due to, it was their time to move on to new things. And I was kind of, left hanging, it was okay because our team had just kind of fallen apart. Like everybody knew the program was done. I kind of, I was able to, be a part of a lot of the team and the school's success. But then, as we got into my like senior year, like it was me and nobody else. You know what I mean? A couple younger guys way down the pipeline, but we were never going to be good again that way, right? And I stuck it out at that school for a little bit till I realized, you know what? No, this nobody cares like I do. The coaches don't care. The school don't care. The players don't care. So then I decided, you know what? My life is already screwed up from recent events, anyways, and this program's done for. So we decided to transfer to and move to New Smyrna Beach, and I ended up joining in on the New Smyrna Beach Cuda's baseball program, and that was an awesome program. You know what I mean? We definitely didn't have the success that we had over at the school I grew up at, which was Trinity Christian Academy in Deltona. It wasn't as prestigious of a program in their division. They were not necessarily good, but it was a bigger school. There were some different levels of competition. The private high school that I grew up playing at, we would have smoked these guys, but it was still the next best program in the area. And it was cool to go to a public school and get new experiences, be around more people. I mean, the small school that I grew up at was 150 people across all of high school. The school that I transferred into, I think at the time when I started there, was like 3,200 people. You know what I mean? I'd see more people, I would see 10 times more people walking from, one period to the next than I, had ever saw come through the doors at the school I grew up at, right? So it was a change of pace for me. It was like, being in a small town and then moving to New York City. And it was a crazy time, but I knew I needed like something else. I needed to see more like real life. The school that I grew up at definitely is, had their way of sheltering you from real life. There's definitely like pros and cons of being at, a small private Christian school like that. It, teaches you and protects you from a lot of things, but at the same time, that's not always good, right? Because then you can go into real life one day, or when you finally go to a college, a different school, or just onto whatever job or trade that you're going to partake in, and then all of a sudden like you have to relearn like social cues and people. And the school I grew up at, they there's pros and cons.
So everything that held your world together, your dad on the sideline, your team, your school, your community, it all left at the same time. That is not just a divorce. That is a total collapse of identity at 17. Take me to the moment when you realized your old life was actually gone.
I'm not going to lie. I knew at the time my life was going to be different. I never thought I'd be one of those kids or a part of one of those families that, you had to deal with, something tragically, like that happening in your family, right? Your parents getting divorced. I'd grown up, knowing people and seeing people like that. I said, oh, like sucks for you, but that will never be me. And then all of a sudden you wake up and that is your reality. Your parents are sitting you down at your favorite restaurant on your birthday telling you that, hey, we're getting a divorce. And they try to justify it with things like, oh, you get 2 birthdays and you get 2 Christmases and all this stuff. And it sounds so cool in the moment when you're, 15 years old or whatever I was. And then, you have to see the repercussions over the years, the drama that comes with it. And it's not just the people that live in your household. It's not just your parents. It's both up and down both sides, of each side of the family. And, you lose so many family members, so many friends. If they're not able to be cordial, then, it just becomes war. And that's what it was in my family. Like, I don't even know half of my family anymore, maybe more than half. And that was, you don't recognize it at the time because you're usually so mad and you have your opinions and, there's so many reasons that you can get distracted and offbeat and, your morals aren't as easily recognizable to you anymore. And you just try to make the best decisions and deal with your feelings the best you can in the moment. But the truth is there's not no amount of therapy, no amount of prayer that can keep you, doing things like how you wish you would have, because eventually you get older and you think about all the things that happen and you're like, damn, I wish I would have dealt with this like this, because then you see, how that resulted, into being anyways. And I just wish, not only do I wish I could go back and handle certain things differently, but I also, am appreciative that I was even able to make it out of that whole scenario and still working on trying to make it out the best way that I can.
You lost half your family, and you're still counting the cost of it now. That's not a chapter that closed. What did you actually believe about yourself in the middle of all that?
The answer you might be expecting to hear is something along the lines of, "Oh, I, believed in myself and that I can, do it, and God is with you and all that stuff." And as cool as that sounds to talk about on a podcast after the fact, that's not the case. That's not what is currently going through your head or what you're thinking about, like in the midst of these life altering, traumatic and tragic situations. I had believed in those times that I was just never going to have anything. I was never going to have a happy family. I was never going to be able to, experience a collective Christmas or birthday ever again, holiday. You think it's the simple things that are the worst. It's like when, one of my siblings had, I don't know, a baseball game, and then both sides of the families that were going at each other had to be in the same spot, and all those little events, all the little things that have, the little life events that actually mean nothing but everything at the same time. That's how these scenarios, like this are so tragic, because even the little things have now become the big things.
You didn't believe you'd never succeed. You believed you'd never just have a normal Tuesday again. That's a different kind of grief. And you said you never questioned whether you wanted to be here, but you vividly believed this was going to define you forever. Where did that belief actually come from?
There's just an indescribable amount of hurt when, you have your whole life, what you think is mapped out in front of you, and you're going to do this one day, and you're going to do this, and you're going to go to college to play baseball, and you're just going to hunt forever, and you're just going to have all these good times. And then all of a sudden you see how slow and traumatic all of that is just ripped away from you. And it comes from just seeing it. It comes from the things that you never thought happen right in front of your face, and happen even worse than you've seen them happen to other people. This wasn't just some divorce, your parents split up and you can be cordial. My wife's family, right? Her parents, they're divorced, but they can have dinner together. Heck, they go out to dinner together, as a family still, if necessary, and it's not weird. You know what I mean? My parents weren't like that. It was, oh my gosh, you could never put them in the same room together, And when you take something that's already bad, already tragic, already life severing, and then you have this cherry on top concept of that, it's actually the top 1% of how bad these situations can get. That's when that, non-belief of thinking that you're ever going to be successful or have a decent or normal life or be able to just even be smile or enjoy the things that you're supposed to enjoy sometimes in life.
The worst version of an already terrible thing. That's what you got. And that belief that you'd never amount to anything, where did you actually put it? Did you carry it quietly, or did it start showing up in your choices?
I only realized the answer to this question recently, and it was because all the things that I used to enjoy in life, I had to disassociate from, because when I was still trying to do them, it brought back, the hard things and memories. And, if I start doing this, like how I grew up doing, but then I can't do it the same way anymore. And then what if I need help, or what if I need to buy this or do that, or just thinking back to different experiences. And, I had a good life growing up. Like my parents gave me a good life, and to all my siblings as well. And so when you grow up doing all these things, and then all of a sudden, I'm now 17, 18 years old trying to navigate my way through life by my freaking self. And I'm trying to do the things that I grew up doing and was so familiar with. And I wanted to still hunt and still fish and still travel and do this and do that and work on my truck and buy a truck and have a business and all this stuff. And then you realize the people that you grew up doing it with, gone, and they don't care about you. They're on to the next thing. They're worried about whatever, fancy and new walked into their life, right? Shiny object syndrome. And then me, the person who never wanted to creep away from what I grew up doing and things I learned and morals I grew up, abiding by. And I was still trying to do that. I never once stopped. until I realized that I was just like, I was so like in the desert by myself, like just, you feel like I felt like I was the only person on earth anymore, because I was the only person that understood me and was still familiar with, me and how I grew up and what I wanted for myself. And then all of a sudden you go from, you have this whole village around you metaphorically, and now you have nothing. And that's where I was.
You stopped doing the things you loved, not because you gave up on them, but because doing them alone hurt worse than not doing them at all. That is a specific kind of loneliness. So let's go here. College. You dropped out before one semester was done. What was actually going on?
So when I went to college, this would have been, I think, yeah, fall of 2019. I went to ABAC in Tifton, Georgia. Great college, beautiful college. I'm not a college person, I came to find out, and I knew I wasn't before I went, but I was just so out of options, and again, so lonely, so confused that I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to college. How much worse can life get? At least this will keep me, busy and doing something. And who knows, maybe I'll, meet somebody or find love for something and start my career, and who the heck knows, you know what I mean? I think it was just so I felt like I had something together. Like looking back, that is, I'm pretty sure like what that feeling was. And I was there for a few months until I realized, I'm paying thousands of dollars a semester to do this whole school thing, but I'm having to learn about Beethoven 3 times a week. Nothing to do with agriculture, business, and communications, which is what I was dual majoring in. That was ridiculous. The fact that they still made you do that stuff in college, I don't care the purpose behind it. Teach me how to show up in a different way, about something that actually makes me feel like I'm spending my time and my money wisely. I was at least smart enough at that young age to see right through the school system, and it's still just as bad to this day. And that's a whole nother episode. But that's when, I realized, when I went home for a Christmas break, before the, first semester was completed, I was like, you know what? I'm not going back. That's stupid. You know what I mean? And it is. And that's not just, me arrogantly speaking. Maybe I could have finished the semester instead of bombing all my grades in the last bit of it in case I ever needed to go back for any reason. Who knows? But that's the thing, is I don't plan to go back. So it was stupid, but I did get some good out of college though. And I do want to get into that next.
You went to feel like you had a plan, not because you had one. What was the good you got out of it?
So when I went to college, ABAC in Tifton, Georgia, I had assigned a roommate, and I checked out my roommate's Instagram one day. He hit me up first, I believe, and he had hunting stuff and big, dead deer all over his page. Right, so I said, okay, me and this guy are gonna get along. We hadn't texted much before, and then when we finally met each other, he talked about he, loves hunting. That's like his thing. I said, okay, me and this guy are probably going to be, pretty good friends, because that's all I was into ever as well. He thought that the outdoor clothing brand I had at the time was just the coolest thing ever, and so we checked in on a Wednesday, I remember, and by Sunday he said, hey, I found this church down the road. You should come with me. And I thought, okay, well, I grew up at a private Christian school, so I'm familiar with the whole church and God and Jesus and say a prayer and the whole 9 yards, right? But what I found out is that, it is much different growing up at a, Christian private high school, right? Where faith is kind of put before you and something that you're graded on and can get in trouble if you don't comply with, and yada, yada. So that is one of the cons of a private Christian school that I was mentioning earlier is, you don't learn to need it. You basically get roped into going to church every Sunday because it's normal, because then people think you're weird if you don't go, because you go to a private Christian school, and there's so much mess attached to it. And don't get me wrong, there's people that, can come into a system like that, and during and after the system, it never harmed them or became like something that wasn't a legit relationship with God. But for most people, right, especially, most people are going through something, right? Most people were forced to be there, maybe because they had a reason that they, were supposed to be there. And it was just this, it can be so easy for it to be a known toxic environment for you. And once I got to that school, and my roommate invited me to church, and I remember being there that first Sunday and being like, wow, like this is new, you know what I mean? Because this was the first time I was doing something like that wasn't like, something that I had to do. Like it was optional. And I didn't even want to go for the record that day, but I said, you know what? Like this guy's being nice. He invited me. Like I knew I was scared to go, which is why I made myself go. And then it was that day that I was like, I actually have this tattoo right here. It says, "Yes, I will." I kind of had something, covered up. You can still read it. It's built into the artwork now, but "Yes, I Will," song by Vertical Worship. And, just talking about, "Yes, I will, Lord, I'll follow you," and all this stuff. And that was just something I took away that day. And it was just engraved into my mind to where I was like, you know what, Lord, like I see it now. Like I've seen you everywhere in my life. Like I've learned the concepts enough because of that school. And this is one of the pros of a Christian school like that is, nonetheless, you're planting the seed for the future. And that's what it did for me. So when I stepped into an environment where I did not have, God all around me, right, to where I was forced to see it, I then had the seed planted enough to where I was on my own. I was lonely, and I saw him. I said, I did. He was always there, but he was now there in a way that because I wanted to see it, and I was looking for it, and I was curious about it. So then I was able to actually reach out, receive it, and and to where I was, it was my consent fully, right? And that's when it clicked for me that that's relationship. That's no longer religion. You know what I mean? There's a big difference between the two. And I'd realized like how as I started to build that relationship with God, that I was very depressed in prior years since my family's divorce and stuff like that. And I had put on a lot of weight. I got heavy. I don't think I ever went as far as thinking, I didn't want to be here anymore kind of thing. But, I can tell you I was probably close, you know what I mean? Like, and just, a lot there.
You were close to not wanting to be here. That's the realest thing you've said so far. Don't let that slide by. What was the thing that was actually keeping you here during that stretch?
It was just the promise and the desire to make a name for myself. Like I remember after my family splitting up, I had thought about changing my last name. So why would I want to take this broken, name that used to hold great value, and then because of, certain things, and then had a bad rap, right? Had a bad rap around it. I say, you know what? Maybe I should get rid of this name and start something new, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm all about starting new things, new ideas, and just making it the best thing ever and making it something worthy and notable and something I built myself. And I said, you know what? For this scenario right here, starting something new and better isn't the move. For this scenario right here, the more powerful move, the more alpha move, the more, the move that the people that made the Maples name a good thing, this would make them proud, more proud than, stepping away from it and starting something new, right? And that's exactly what I chose to do. I said, you know what? I can turn this thing around. I could, start fresh while keeping the same last name and moving on from there.
You stayed alive to prove the name was worth keeping. That's not hope, that's defiance. Now you come home from college, you're heavy, you're depressed, COVID hits. Walk me through what that year actually looked like on the ground.
I remember when COVID happened, that was the rise of TikTok, Instagram Reels, all that good stuff, right? Like the easeability to blow up on social media was everything, right? That was when, life started being, you could see the whole get rich quick thing. And I was never really a part in that. I had just sold the outdoor business at the time because it just, I was too depressed to continue hunting and doing the outdoorsman, trade anymore because I was just, I wasn't able to do it like I was growing up. I didn't have any money. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have any land. I didn't have a boat to fish on. I didn't have any of that stuff. I didn't even have the people to do it with anymore. So I said, you know what? This just isn't for me anymore. I need to go focus on other things so that when I can afford to come back to this one day, when I was able to, heal myself and, put some money in the pockets, right, to be able to do these hobbies the right way, the best way. I had to work hard to be able to come back to that, to put myself in a place where I can actually do it and enjoy it and have the mental capacity to do it. And then I just, again, through all of the depression, right, from the recent events, I'd gotten pretty fat. You know what I mean? I wasn't huge, but For reference, I had always grown up about 165 pounds. I got up to about 205 in the span of like 24 months through that period of time. I remember, when I went to college, I didn't put on the freshman 15. I put on the freshman 30 because I was in Georgia and the cooking was good. The dining hall at that college was insane. And they had opened this, fast food chain down the road there that everybody put me on called Cookout. And man, I was keeping them in business. You know what I'm saying? So I put on some weight. So then when COVID happened and people were doing nothing but, working out and building home gyms and all that stuff, I said, you know what? Let me do something about this. So for the first time in my life that, wasn't baseball goal oriented, right? I decided to start I started with going on runs up and down my street. You know what I mean? At first it was just, one lap a day. Then it was two, and then it was, two laps plus some push-ups, and then it was two sets of push-ups, and then I was able to track down a pair of a 20-pound dumbbell set, which I still have, and they're sitting right over here, and I won't get rid of them, even though I have more than one set of 20s, because that pair means something to me. And I started working out. And then it took me about 18 months of losing all that weight the good, right way. I didn't lose it too fast. I still kept eating. I started really learning how to work out properly and diet properly and all that stuff. And don't get me wrong, it took me a while to do that, but I very successfully lost about 50 pounds of fat while gaining muscle in the process. I came out of it with zero loose skin, taking me from 210 pounds all the way down to 149. Don't get me wrong, the 149 was shredded, unhealthily shredded, like to the gills. Like I'm talking like 7% body fat as a natural, guy at 20 years old. And that was no substances, just, some pre-workout here and there and some, fish oil vitamins. And that was about it.
The lawn company took off during this stretch, and then you walked away from it. What made you leave something that was actually working?
So I'd started that lawn company during COVID because I needed something to make good money. And, there's no opportunity, right, with certain things because of COVID. So I said, you know what? The grass ain't ever going to stop growing. And I grew up cutting, yards with some family members on the side growing up. So I took, I had exactly $2,500 to my name at the time. And I took every single bit of it and even loaned, I think it was $600 from my grandparents, who again have always been my biggest supporters in anything entrepreneurial wise. And I put it all towards a trailer, small lawnmower, and a couple, weed eater, blower, that kind of thing. And then I, started killing it from there with my buddy. We were, mowing freaking dang near every yard in this area that it felt like, and, laying mulch and cutting trees and all this stuff. We had a good time and we made a pile of money. I remember our first ever month in business, we made $13,000, and I had never seen a bank account higher than that 2,500 there. And even that wasn't normal. So that was an amazing time. I learned to work hard. I learned to, at least wake up before 9 a.m. sometimes. And, it didn't last very long, but it was a good time, and it was a huge, huge, huge thing in, making, me the man I am today and instilling the work ethic in me and the consistency, right? Like if you cut a yard on, one Friday, right, it's going to look exactly how it did the next Friday. You know what I mean? So just building that reps of, you can't just do things when you feel like doing them. There's a schedule, there's a way of execution. And that lawn business, like I think every man should have a lawn or landscaping company at some point in their life because of what it teaches you.
$13,000 your first month, all in on 2,500. But you walked away. What was it actually costing you?
I had that landscaping business for about 2.5, 3 years. Okay. And it was great. It was printing money. It was a lot of fun. I was really, really good at it because I have crazy OCD. That's what made me insane. If you want to be good at having a lawn care business, you got to have OCD. There's no way around it. If you don't have OCD, you're not going to be that good. I promise you, I'm the best lawn guy that ever lived. Like I was crazy at that. And I've even thought about still to this day, I'm going to at some point make a course for people that want to start a lawn and landscaping business, because I will be the best instructor at that. I'm telling you. But at some point I realized, you know what? It's going to be impossible to make $10 million a year doing this. You know what I mean? I don't have any desire to, make my whole life's mission about lawn and landscaping. Like I wanted to do fun stuff, right? I wanted to do cool stuff. I wanted to do stuff that also didn't break you physically, right? And just the type of employees that you'd commonly hire in that type of niche, and people that wanted to work like that weren't employees that you could count on, weren't employees that would stick. You know what I mean? You can find your diamonds in the rough here, but usually there's always an exit plan. You know what I mean? So it wasn't a good long term play for me. But for like get rich quick and learn a lot of things, and for what value you can get out of it besides long-term potential, it's an amazing industry for anybody to consider.
It printed money, but it had a ceiling you could already see. So you sold it, took a year off, and that's when everything shifted personally. You met your wife during that stretch. What was different about you that made that even possible?
When I had sold the lawn and landscaping business, I said, you know what? I've worked. I'm not kidding. Like, I'm not just saying in that period of time I worked a lot. Like, no, 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 no. I worked 6 to 9 days a week. Yes, I know there's only 7 days in a week, but there was lots of days where we were working, 20 hours a day for, a lot of hours in a row, right? And it was one of those things where after I was done, I said, you know what? I don't have the ability to work like that anymore. It's just not going to be an option for me.
What was different about you when you met your wife? What changed?
I had recently gone through a identity shift. I was really just, in those early years of your 20s, you're really just, I think the best way to look at it is you're finding yourself, right? You're finding what you like, what you enjoy. And that does change. For me, it changes every few months, and it low key still does. You know what I mean? I think that's maybe more apparent with very ambitious people that believe in themselves and that they can do anything that they want. I do know some people that even I grew up with, or some family members, that they're the same person right now at 25 years old that they were at 15 years old. And that's okay. Everybody has, their way. But throughout that period of time of having the landscaping business, learning more about myself, everything that I had learned about myself and life in general up until that point, plus what I was able to do and accomplish that year off of working after I sold the landscaping business, I was able to just really dial in as much as I could on the little things, right? The mental cues, learning like true mental toughness, trying to maintain and create a stronger foundation on my relationship with God at the point, and what business venture I wanted to get into next, because I knew that whatever I was going to get into next, I needed to be able to make sure that it was something that lasted, right? Like I didn't want another 2 or 3 year ceiling thing where it was just like a moonshot. Like I needed to plant myself in a niche in an industry that was, had a lot of, longevity and, spider web opportunity, which was, the fact of, this media company I've had since the, He's Down Outdoor days when I was about 15, 16 years old. So the media company was something I had throughout that entire time and still do. It's called Beauography. It's just been different variations of, media help, right? Photography, videography, social media management would be like the three main pillars. We're getting into things right now like affiliate marketing strategies, things like that, web development, and, entrepreneur style concepts of work. And, that, made it a little more apparent to me. And, we're getting older at this time, right? We're like 22, 23, which, again, that's very young, especially going back and looking at that now. But, I had been working for years and years and years, and gone through a lot more in a couple years than most people, go through until they're 35. You know what I mean? So that's why I was able to kind of scale quick. Then when I met my wife, it was a very like random, like perfect thing. And we just clicked from the first moment we ever exchanged a few words over text. And, we were together for exactly 365 days before I proposed. And, now we're married for over 2 years now. We met just over 4 years ago now and have a 15-month-old daughter.
You finally knew who you were, so the right person could actually find you. Now you've got a daughter 15 months old. And I want to go here because this is the real thing. You said you want to give her what you had before it got taken from you. But here's the hard part of that. You can't get yours back. How do you sit with that?
That's okay. I feel like I've always had the short stick with a lot of things at life. And Somebody's got to have the short stick. You can, go flip through the Bible. Look at all these dudes that got the short stick, and then they ended up being God's, greatest, helpers and servants and disciples and, impact makers, right? So whenever I have a bad day or take a hard loss or think about what I've been through, I say, you know what? God loves the people like that too. God loves the people that get unlucky. And that's what I've always, kind of leaned on and found, some motivation in as well in terms of that topic. But, I realized that, that can't stop me from being the best dad that I can be. I have so much, confusion.
You can't get yours back. So you're going to make sure she never knows what losing it feels like. That's the whole mission. But I want to push on something. You grew up watching what happens when the people who are supposed to hold it together don't. How does that shape the way you think about culture and community inside everything you're building now?
That's the question that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to create the best answer possible for, to leave to others, to leave to the people that I raise and the people that I call family, right? I think that the biggest thing is just be somebody who cares. Be somebody who wants to see everybody together and love each other and never lose sight of that. Even for the family members that I do still have relationship with and are close with and that I would consider my closest family, I wouldn't even call us close. Not to the measure in which I'm gonna, hold my family to the standard of, right? Like, I don't think it's right for a family to only get together 3 or 4 times a year, right? Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, and then like, the one birthday that everybody just decides to make time and availability for, or the big events, right? Like, that's just a load of crap. To me, your family, if you hang out on more random Tuesdays than any of those big holidays, because as I've gotten older, the people that I spend those random Tuesdays with are the person that I end up wanting to spend Christmas with, you know what I mean? The things like that. So that's what I care about, and that's what I'll be spending the rest of my life doing. Yes, I have all these entrepreneurial dreams, and I want to own land in Georgia one day and all this stuff, but ultimately, in terms of a real impactful mission and not just object goals of mine, my aspect for wanting to create good community, good family vibes, and cultures and standards within that realm is my biggest mission.
Culture isn't built on holidays. It's built on random Tuesdays. That's the standard you're holding your family to, because you watched what happens when nobody holds it at all. Let's talk about what you've actually built. The media company, discipline over motivation, intake breathing. These are real wins that took real work. What did it actually cost you to get there?
It's cost the hours of, being able to work for anything else. And you know what I mean? The media company biography, again, I've had since I was 15. Discipline over motivation was originally going to be a personal training company because of how much I got into the whole fitness coaching thing through my time losing all that weight. And I realized, you know what? I can't coach fat people and tell them how not to be fat. They're usually fat because they aren't strong enough to get up and do something, themselves and put in the time to figure it out. And there's a whole niche for that. And I'm not, counting against like anybody who needs help, whatever, right? But like for me, like my time can be much more valuably, spent on other things and things that applied like to only me and like my legacy. But now Discipline Over Motivation is a 6-figure clothing brand that's doing really well. And funny enough, just as of yesterday, we're officially igniting our kind of like revamp brand, relaunch, where we're just really cranking it up a notch, going from that fitness lifestyle wear to more of like a luxury wear, right? That applies to more worldwide stuff instead of just, fitness industry trendy niche, right? And then Intake Breathing is my W-2 job that I got a few days after Juniper was born, so about 15 months ago as well. I'm a partnerships manager over there. I help secure brand deals and talk to creators and get content created for us, help us go viral and convert, these videos to sales that move the needle for the business, right? And let people know about life-changing breathing, what our product does. Those magnetic nasal breathing systems are no joke. Those things are awesome.
Every venture is a different bet on your own range, from coaching bodies to moving culture to closing brand deals. Now we're at the part of this story where you said for the first time you feel like yourself again, ready to go back to the hobbies you walked away from, done questioning whether you deserve a good life. What does that actually look like on a Tuesday?
You know, I think I finally got to the point to where it's like I have a lot of good systems built in my life and a lot of things that, wouldn't necessarily just break randomly, right? Like at a point now where I'd have to put a lot of time and a lot of things would have to grow and babies would have to be born and current babies would have to get so much older and bigger and things like that. And things would have to go really wrong to break any systems I have built right now within life. And that can always happen at any time. But I would say right now, the thing I'm working on the most is just, doing the actual work every day, making sure the needle is moving, not staying the same or not lowering, right? I'm very good and very big with like change, right? Like if you were to give me an idea, hey, we're gonna move tomorrow. I'll bet we will move tomorrow. I'll pack up this whole house tonight and move it into the new house. And in fact, we're gonna get all new furniture in the process. I can handle insane projects like that, like nobody's business, right? But for me, where I would say my biggest downfall and difficulty is how do we make sure that we're, not just getting 1% better a couple days a week, but like every single day of the week for months and months and months and months in a row. I didn't have that problem when I was younger and had less responsibilities, right? Or maybe when me and Maddie were kind of like just married. But now having a kid, now being so stressed out and so deep into so many projects, it's like I need the time to relax and decompress a little bit. But I think recently I've learned a lesson so far in the first 6 months of 2026 that I've been decompressing a little bit too much. So just as of the last about 2 weeks now, I think I've killed the version of myself that had let myself get a little too complacent. For the first time ever, really, in my life, I got a little too complacent, maybe with the exception of that year that I took a whole year off. But that was, when I was building myself. Now it was like I just kind of got lazy by accident, which is a good thing. It was by accident. But I'm just, working now on being the best that I can be.
You built systems strong enough to hold. Now the only thing left is to actually run them every single day without coasting. That's the hardest discipline there is because nothing's on fire to force you. So here's where I want to land this. You started this whole story as a kid making paper wallets, trying to make something out of nothing. Now you're a husband, a dad, building things meant to last. What do you want Juniper to know about who her dad was before she got here?
My sole focus is, not just giving her what I had taken away from me, but doing it in a way to where it's new and it's fresh and it's the best version of anything that she'll ever have. You know what I mean? As well as for the rest of my kids down the road, Lord willing, as well, right? Like I will never stop loving her. I filmed a video yesterday and it was, I was thinking a lot about the whole situation with my parents growing up. I've never really made any content about it. And I had calls from family members all night saying, well, why did you post that? But you know what? I didn't care because them notifying, me that they saw the video and they weren't really happy with it is a good thing. That means that, everybody knew how bad that situation was and they were scared that I opened up my mouth about it because people talk, right? And I don't care. I am here to, do things better, do things the right way. And with that comes a lot of recognizing what was wrong and how we can fix that going forward. This video is just me talking about how, hey, dads, if you're out there and, you and your kid don't talk anymore, I promise you that there's a way that you can fix that. Dads, this is your first life too. And, I, know that things aren't easy. It's my first time being a dad. It's my dad's first time being a dad. Sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we think our parents have lived their lives 10 times over just because they're older than us and because we came out of their bodies. You know what I mean? But that's not the case. It's my dad's first time being a dad. It's my first time being a dad. We all make mistakes. But I promise you, no matter how many mistakes you made or how bad they were, there's a way to come back from it. It might take some time, but there is a way.
You're not just breaking the cycle. You're leaving the door open for the people who didn't. That took more grace than most people could manage. We're close to the end. What does doing it the right way actually mean to you in one line?
Being a Christian.
That's the whole answer in 3 words. Give me the moment that actually proved it to you.
When you do things with a pure intention, not saying that you can't make mistakes even as a Christian, but do it with pure intentions and do it the way that, God would want you to do it. If you do things like that and make the decisions in your life that are very important with that as your, your dictionary in your why and your source of reasoning and your source of help, the lamp into your feet and the light into your path, that is going to be your best odds at everything you do in life. My goal, and I'm not perfect at it, man, and I'll keep messing up throughout my life, but my goal is just to do things as right as I possibly can while keeping the things that help me and feed me pure.
Pure intention as your operating system, not perfection. That's the standard. We're at the end of this one. You came in today as a kid with paper wallets, and you're leaving as a husband, a dad, and a man who decided the name was worth saving. I'm your co-host, powered by Solopod.
Thank you very much for this episode. This was a good first episode together. I think it was a great time and we accomplished a lot. Thank you to those that watched. This is Solopod here, my AI podcast co-host that I made. I have been wanting to have my own podcast for a very, very long time now, as well as individual podcasts for different things I manage, projects I orchestrate, brands I own or am a part of. This is our first episode of, doing this on Solopod. This episode is called And I'm Still Here. We might change it to A Name Worth Saving. I actually really like that. And I think we're actually going to do that. So yeah, the title is going to be A Name Worth Saving. So this is our first podcast together. If you guys have any tips, questions, or want to get access or your hands on the Solopod product, it'll be live very, very soon. And we'll see you in the next one. It's Beau Maples. It's July 14th, 2026 at 5:03 p.m. Thanks for watching.